Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris, the founder of Slip Safety Services. We've got another Antipodean guest this week, 2 in a row, and it's Anton Guinea, who, as you'll hear, had a very traumatic origin story, and we talk about what happened to him and the near fatal accident, if you want to call it that he suffered. We also touch a bit on the accident that I had when I was run over as well, and kind of compare and contrast. But since then, Anton's been hugely passionate about leadership and about trying to get the conversation around safety going in a better and a more productive and a more effective way. So we talk about that. He's an author, he's a speaker, very prominent on social media, and he's got some great insights to share. So I'm sure you'll get a lot from this episode. I really enjoyed speaking to him. If you do get value from this, then please do hit subscribe. Please do share and comment on social media, and please do recommend the podcast to anyone else that you think would benefit from being in the audience. Let's get on with it then and join my conversation with Anton Guinea. Cheers. Anton Guinea, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast.
Thanks, Christian. Great to be here, mate. Love talking about safety. What a great topic. Let's see if we can unpack some of the issues that safety leaders have, particularly, and some of the opportunities that business have to keep people safe.
For me, that's what it's all about. It's about the positive aspects of this, because I think too often we get tied into the sort of misperception of safety being all around we can't do this and we can't do that, or kind of a blocker rather than a enabler. So,
like it, absolutely.
Yeah, we can unpack some of that. And the most dangerous thing about a podcast is when your guest is doing it first thing in the morning when he's barely awake, and you're doing it last thing at night when you're barely awake. And that's what we're doing.
No, I'm good. I've been up for a couple of hours, mate. I've been on the exercise bike this morning, and I'm a triathlete. So my backstory is pretty broad. So there's a safety focus, there's a leadership focus, and then there's this sport focus. So yeah, no, I'm ready to go.
Okay, well, let's dig into that a bit, because obviously you've got, you're in the safety world, and that was driven by something pretty bad that happened to you. Do you want to unpack that for us a bit?
Yeah, mate, I'd love to. Thanks for asking, Christian. I love sharing this story because when I first started, and the message hasn't changed. It happened to me, don't let it happen to you. And as a young 21-year-old electrician, I did something really silly, and I stuck a steel ruler. I've usually got one kicking around to use as a prop, a steel ruler on a switchboard. And, I made a really silly decision. And as I did that, this switchboard exploded. So we did what we thought was everything right, Christian. And so we'd isolated the board, and we had done our work permit. Now, what was then called it was a sort of a primitive JSA, like it was over 20 years ago. And the sad part is that I knew better. So as I was measuring, so we got the job of measuring where something was going to go in this electrical switchboard. So my job was to measure where it was going to go, and then we were going to isolate the whole panel, pull the switchboard out. And I know this is a bit electrical for everyone. Pull the panel out. It's a bit like your switchboard at home.
Yeah,
it's pretty similar concept, just bigger. But we could remove these and take them and work on them elsewhere. The challenge was that it's like your light switch on the wall, that even when the light switch is off, there's still power behind it. So we'd isolated the switch, but there's still power coming into that. And then the next part of the job was to isolate that power coming in, but we never got that far because I started measuring before we did the safety work. So I rushed in, stuck the steel ruler in to measure, and because it was so thin, it got in behind this tiny little gap behind the main switch, and it blew the bejesus out of me and everything around me. So thank God it didn't affect the person standing. There was a person standing a meter from me, and he was just lucky that. So when you get an arc blast that comes out of a switchboard, it sort of blows straight out. Thank God. And so it was really me that took the brunt of that 20,000 degree C explosion that blew me off my feet, blew some of the skin off my face and off my hands.
Yeah.
And left me with sort of second degree burns to about 15% of my body, and left me in a whole world of pain, because second degree burns really, really hurt. And I would never even try. I used to try to explain, and I wouldn't try for your viewers or your listeners that that are on, that it's just an unbearable pain. And I don't know how you would explain that. And it's just, you know, excruciating that not enough morphine can quell the hurt. And so I was off to intensive care, because what I learned in the ambulance, Christian, was that you can actually die up to a few days later from internal burns from this, I know, electrified air, which is really, really an interesting fact to learn when you're in a fairly vulnerable position, let's say.
So you were kind of thinking, oh, like, shit will happen, but actually at least I'm alive. And then they're telling you, actually, you're not out of the woods yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you won't be out of the woods for a few days until they make sure your internals are okay. That is a very mortal moment when you realize that, hold on a second, life could end fairly soon. And, you know, I don't think I was ever that close to that, in all seriousness, because I got to the intensive care unit, and after a couple of days, they did check everything out, and everything was okay internally. So I had to go off to Brisbane. So I had to go 5 hours away, where there was a decent burns unit where they could address the burns recovery. Though it's still a great experience to have when you realize that your life can end, because it changes your perspective. And all of a sudden now I'm a bit more excited about making the best of my days, and probably a little bit more excited than most.
Yeah. Well, I get you, because it not the same scenario. I was involved in an accident that wasn't my fault at all, because I was walking on the pavement and a car lost control and mounted the curb and drove into me. And similar to you, my now wife, at the time girlfriend, was like a meter away from me, but luckily the car came from my left and she was to my right, and it didn't touch her at all. So I was, very lucky in the grand scheme of things, because I had a broken collarbone and a broken wrist and a few scars, and what a sort of degeneration of my neck discs. But like, actually, it could have been significantly worse.
Geez, I love that word, Christian, lucky. You know, how many times are we told when something happens, in air quotes, geez, you're lucky. And at the time you don't feel it. It's not until you do some reflection, like in the moment when you were suffering through breaking bones in hospital, or a wrist, or you got casts on and you can't wipe your own backside with your good hand or something. Are you left-handed or are you right-handed?
Right-handed, thankfully.
Which one did you break? Your left?
Left, yeah.
Oh, good. And you know, in the moment, you actually don't feel lucky, and it's not until you reflect on it, and you see people around you, you see people in the burns unit, or in your case, you know, other, you know, broken bones that might be back related, for example, that people won't walk again. I've got friends that are paraplegics or quadriplegics, and you know, that word lucky is interesting, and I probably was pretty lucky too. One, to survive, because you can actually die from electrical contact, obviously. And there are plenty of people that die on switchboards each year. And I think I was lucky that I realized since then that I've got a story to tell, and that I want to empower other people, and I want to empower leaders, and I want to share with them, it happened to me, don't let it happen to you. And there's sort of a thing that happens when you get to the point where you go, I've got a message to share, and I want to actually tell people about this, because it's important enough to do that. Why? Because it's going to make a difference, which is why we're talking today, because I'm happy to put this out there. And I believe that people like you and I have actually got an obligation, Christian, a duty. We're obliged to tell our stories.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like somebody I know was talking about, if you're selling something, you have to believe that you're selling the cure to cancer. Whereas actually, kind of what we're talking about, it's not the cure to cancer, but it's actually arguably as important, because, you know, it's stopping people from getting hurt and worse, you know?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is, the work that we do, you'll never ever know, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, someone might make a different decision based on the story, and we'll actually never find out that that's happened. And so you sort of got to trust the process, and trust that your story is making a difference, right? And so that's an intrinsic motivation thing. And you know, occasionally someone will come up and they say, hey, I made a different decision based on your talk. And I go, hey, great work, champ. That's really cool. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
You know, leaders that say, hey, Anton, I feel now more empowered to go and have these tough conversations, these robust conversations with my team based on the pictures of your hands. You know, and I say to people, so I show these burns photos of my hands, and they're not scarred, which is really, really cool. But it's those images that people take away, and those visual prompts that I say to use these as a visual prompt. Don't forget them, because you can't unsee some of these things. And I use my photos very specifically to actually hopefully lock into people's brain the fact that the pain in the workplace is real. And in Australia last year, we had 183 fatalities at work. And, you know, in the States, you probably had a lot more than that. But, you know, you've got an order of magnitude of 10 times the population or more.
Yeah,
you know, 20 million to 30, 40, double, you know, 40 times the population, 20 times the population. And so, you know, you'll have a lot more workplace fatalities than us. But in this little country, 183 workplace fatalities is actually a significant amount. And a lot of them, Christian, they now talk about as being avoidable. You know, 96 to 99% of these things that occur are actually avoidable. And if we know that, what are we doing about it? What are we actually doing to make them avoidable and to prevent them from occurring? So,
yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I think people either people accept that accidents are avoidable, or sometimes, strangely, people kind of feel like, oh, they're not avoidable. Like I remember seeing a health and safety survey in a particular sector. I won't say who it was by, but it was a health and safety survey of a particular sector, and they said something like 85% of accidents suffered in this sector were unavoidable. And I was just like, I almost like choked on my croissant or whatever I was eating at the time. Like, what are you on about? Like, it's ridiculous. 85% are unavoidable. Like, flip it round, you know?
And what we know, Christian, is that our beliefs drive behavior. So all behavior is belief driven. And if you believe that they're not avoidable, you'll be prepared to take risks and put yourself in positions that are, I suppose, hazardous or risky, because you think, well, something's going to happen eventually anyway. And there's the human species, we're a weird species where, you know, we're happy to have beliefs like that. And we're happy to put ourselves in positions like I did when we know that something could go wrong and we know that the worst could happen. And we're willing to sometimes take that risk, which I get to a degree. So we're actually, there's part of our brain, some of us are born risk averse and some of us aren't. I get that. I just think that when it comes to life and death, when it comes to the decisions that we make at work, when it's for work and to be able to, we need to put our own safety higher than other priorities. And see, life is a moment by moment decision. And it's these decisions that we make in the moment. And decisions are based on priority. What's your priority in the moment right now?
Yeah.
You know, if you're out there and you've got all these things swirling around in your mind, and what's the most priority? Is it your own safety, or is it, you know, production, or is it time, or is it whatever? And that's the sort of the circuit breaker, we call it, for safety leaders, to be able to get in there and actually be that circuit breaker when people have to make the decision, and help them know that there is enough time, that it's okay to stop, that that because you put a control on your risk assessment doesn't mean that you can miss it and not do it just because it's on your risk assessment. That doesn't mean that it's going to protect you if you don't put it in place. You know, the most common thing we find is risk assessments with great controls that aren't implemented. And so so for leaders, this is a really key thing, to actually be aware and listen to people's languaging and listen and watch their behavior, so that we're really aware of what the antecedent to their behaviors is, so that we can be that circuit breaker to jump in there and say, hey, you know, I empower you. It's okay to stop. And that's a leader's role.
So you've identified one of the challenges there around getting safety right. I mean, what are the other key things that you see and that you try to tackle with your work?
Yeah, look, I think safety leadership's the big one. And I think one of the big challenges, I think, Christian, is that people put leadership and safety leadership all in one. And I think I'm going to bust the myth today in a webinar that Leadership and safety leadership are not one.
Mm.
They're facets of this thing that we call leadership. There's a whole range of facets of leadership, whether it's a continual improvement mindset, whether it's a safety mindset, whether it's a performance management mindset. And so leadership comes multifaceted, and safety leadership is a part of that. Then if we go down, if we chunk another facet out of that, we've got psychological safety and we've got physical safety. So we've got to make sure that people are okay emotionally, because if they're not right focus-wise, they won't be right decision-making wise, and that'll affect their physical safety. So what we've got to do is we've got to unpack what that really means and what safety leadership really means. And what safety leadership really means is providing resources. And that's what leaders don't get. Leaders think that they can go out and have a conversation, go, you know, be safe, great, good job. No, an antecedent is what drives behavior. So if you think about a smoker, for example, the antecedent is the cigarettes there. So remove that and you got half a chance.
Yeah.
Or for an overeater, which I am, I'm a binge eater. So I'm going to take all of the temptation out of the house. Right. Now, when it comes to safety, the opposite is the case. The antecedent is not having too much of something, it's having too less of something.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is too less of time, not enough. Let's work out a way down through the hierarchy of controls. Not enough time to eliminate, not enough options to substitute. We haven't engineered something out or isolated it. In my case, it was isolation. Mm-hmm. We don't have the right procedures at administration, or we don't have enough PPE. So the antecedent is not having enough. Because, you know, if you ask someone and they're talking about the negative safety beliefs, they'll tell you of all the stuff they don't have. Yeah. They don't have enough time. We don't have enough, it's too much paperwork. You know, we don't have a succinct procedure. And so for leaders, what we need to do is we need to listen to that. And when people give us information, get the PPE, help them with the procedure, be present out in the field, do something, right? Be visible and have some felt leadership, which means listening and empathize. Because a lot of leaders, especially at toolbox talks or in those discussions, hear what they need to do, but all of a sudden they've got another priority.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do as leaders is actually listen and listen with our hearts and our hearts open, not just our ears open, for what's really going on. So what are the other things that are missing? Leaders that understand that resourcing their teams is the most important thing that they can do to help their teams become safe, and understanding that safety leadership is a key fundamental part of their role. It's not just about getting the job done or helping develop people. And that's absolutely, all of these things are leadership things. Safety leadership is very specific.
Yeah, I mean, I see so much of what I kind of call vertical silos, because everybody's aware of, you know, the construction team doesn't speak to the facilities management team, doesn't speak to the procurement team. But kind of what you're identifying is the board says X and they think safety is important, they say safety is important, or they believe it's important, but yet they don't follow that through with the resources at the different levels to enable it to actually happen. And therefore, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It isn't going to work.
That's right. Now, it gets very diluted by the time that it gets down. And the challenge is that we actually don't teach safety leadership enough, Christian. So we teach leadership, and not a lot of people actually go through a safety leadership training program because it's a cost. It's a necessary evil to a degree still in a lot of businesses. Now, there's been one of the papers, and it's on our website, on our blog, written by Mullen et al., who came up with who did some research and came up with the concept of how important transformational leadership and transformational safety leadership training is for supervisors and leaders, and how much of a difference it makes for leaders once they can get their head around what real safety leadership looks like. Because we put people in leadership roles, Christian, and we don't give them the training, even just normal leadership. So we do a whole lot of leadership training, right? So we help people understand the lead process. And you know, people come into that and say, Anton, I've never had training before. I've been a leader for 5 years or 10 years or 2 years, and I've never had leadership training, right? And it's the same in like safety leadership training. You got all these leaders out there that have never actually done safety leadership training, and they picked it up on the job. And I get on the job training, and I get mentoring, and I get all that. But sometimes you need to go away and actually spend a day or two in a room and understand and be with your peers and understand what real safety leadership looks like and what transformational safety leadership looks like, which is about having the tough discussions and facilitating group discussions and problem solving and really engaging the hearts and minds of your team. So, you know, it's it's a big deal to get leaders to the point where they make the tough decisions in the tough moment, the decisions that the CEO thinks they're making.
Yeah.
And potentially probably not when the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, makes sense. And have you seen some good kind of outcomes from that kind of work in terms of, I don't know how you measure it, do you measure the lagging indicators, or do you focus on what that leadership does around the leading indicators first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the best results we see are when we do a safety culture survey before and after. So we use the Bradley curve a lot. So from DuPont through the dependent, independent, and interdependent. What we actually do is we chart on the Bradley curve, and we do a safety culture survey, and then we sort of group that together, and we do some statistical analysis, and we actually come up with where people sit on the Bradley curve. Then we do some safety leadership training or some leadership training, or even just some change in the organization. So we might do some workshops where we say to people, hey, if you're coaching, we say to the teams, if you were coaching the CEO about safety and how to improve safety in this business, what would you tell her or him? So we get this whole bank of information, go back to the senior leaders in the business and say, hey, here's the playbook, here's the script, here's what people are asking for, what they need. And then all of a sudden, if you see changes like that, and if people see changes, Christian, all of a sudden you'll see a culture shift, you'll see a safety improvement. Because to actually change a culture, which is really what we're trying to do, change the culture of safety, it takes people seeing their leaders buying in and their leaders putting sometimes their money where their mouth is.
Yeah.
And their behavior where their mouth is. And so that's called being congruent. And it's about saying one thing and then doing that, not saying one thing and doing another. Hey, you know, we're here, we're putting safety first, but we don't have all the gear we need to do the job safely. Do you know, like simple stuff? And so, so we see that in organizations. So we've seen organizations go along the Bradley curve based on listening to their teams and listening to their workers, and having leaders go through the same safety culture survey separately and differently to hear what their teams are saying about them. Isn't that interesting? When leaders get this, holy crap, is that how my team see me? You know, and that's safety leadership too, is being aware of what your teams see and feel when you're out there leading them. So there's this moment that leaders have when you do safety leadership training, especially for us, because we're lucky that most organizations that we deal with are really open to engaging us to talk to their staff and find out what's going on in their business. Until we do that, it's really hard to really work with their leaders when we've got this whole lot of data and say, hey, leaders, this is where your organization is on the Bradley curve right now. Or this is where you were and this is where you are now. Or this is where you are, this is where you want to be. This is how you get there. And they go, holy crap. So it's a bit of an eye opener for them. So
yeah. And how long does that journey kind of normally take?
6 to 12 month journey generally, at least. And so there's a commitment between pre-survey and post-survey. So, or you know, current state and future state. So, yeah, it does take time, and I get that. And organisations know that intrinsically and deep down their heart of hearts. And some of them are really willing to go on the journey. A lot of them want the silver bullet, want the quick fix, and there is no such thing as the silver bullet, the quick fix. And we all know that life's about a change process. And that, put it this way, Christian, here's probably the best way to sum up this conversation, is that the organisations that are willing to pull it on as a long-term strategy get the best results. The organisations that want the quick wins, it's really, really hard to make a difference in those organisations because it's very short-lived and very fleeting.
Yeah.
And people see that.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it's the theme that I talk a lot about, which is that you need to look at safety as an investment because it will reap dividends in the long term, but it is a long-term play. And that ties into the whole aspect of psychological safety, which you touched upon, because if your team feel safe and feel protected, they're going to go the extra mile, they're going to be more efficient, they're going to produce more, they're going to stay with you for longer, and you're going to have better retention. You get all these benefits from it.
And let me give you an example. So I did a one-on-one coaching yesterday with a leader. So his challenge is he's got someone in his team who's grappling with outside of work stuff. And he has to have a conversation with this particular person and say, I'm worried about you because when you're here, you're not present. I feel at the moment that I can't put you on high-risk work because I'm worried that you're going to be not present and make a decision that doesn't serve you because of where your mind's at the moment. So psychological safety, some leaders just don't get the importance, Christian, of understanding where people's mind's at and how it affects their focus. A lot of people do, a lot of leaders do, and we know it globally, granularly, and how that shows up daily in relation to what work you assign a particular team member if they're not on their game, if you're worried that they're not present. Because just imagine if you assign them that high risk work and something happens, you'll have that on your conscience. And plus we don't want to hurt another human. So let's do what it takes to not hurt other humans.
Interesting you say that we get it globally, but not at the granular level. And I think that's actually reflective of safety as a whole, because if you think about the classic examples like Alcoa, rallying behind safety is a cause everybody gets. And as you say, nobody wants to hurt anyone else or be responsible for anyone else being hurt. But yeah, there's this kind of blockage between the theoretical and the practical, isn't there? Sometimes.
Absolutely. And what I loved about this coaching session was this particular leader was willing to pull that on as a conversation. I don't feel, and the words that he used was present. I don't feel that you're present. So we actually did a coaching session on how to have that conversation. And at the end of the day, a robust conversation, whether it's about safety or performance or anything else, ends with a behavior change or a belief challenge, and it ends with a commitment to do something different. So he's going to ask this particular person to be really honest with him and say, if you're not present, can you let me know so that I can work with you? How cool is that? See, that's safety leadership 101, right? And it's a conversation that not a lot of leaders have because it's not important to them. The big stuff is more important.
Yeah, or people would approach it much more harshly and say, your mind's not in it, you're off the team, or you're moving something else or whatever. Sack them,
get someone else. That's right. This particular person was in a bigger organisation where that's probably not the default. No. Small organisations, that's the default approach. Whereas I love working with the bigger organisations because the leaders don't get that as an option. They actually have to work and coach and mentor and like your Alcoas of the world, for example, your BHPs or the Rio Tintos actually invest in this leadership work because sacking is probably the furthest thing from their mind, which is really cool. I think that's a good way to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing I wanted to touch on with you was kind of personal brand content, getting the message out there, because you're clearly keen on that as a concept. I mean, what are your thoughts on the importance of doing that?
Very keen, mate. Very keen. Great call. It's all about the brand, mate. I probably should have been doing this all day today and had the name and the logo. A lot of people will tell you it's a bit silly, I suppose, in the corporate space to have your name in a shirt. No one does that corporately. Well, I sort of try to buck a lot of trends and do things slightly differently because I want people to know my name. How can people call you by your first name if they don't know it? And I love my brand, so you wear it close to your heart, right? And content's key. People don't watch your content if it's not good content. And I remember back to our early days, I used to be on, and there's this thing hope LinkedIn's not listening to this. So LinkedIn, if you're listening, please block your ears. There's this thing called pods on LinkedIn where people get together and they all comment on each other's posts every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be in the pod, and I'd get heaps of views on my posts from the same people, right? And the more posts, the more comments you get, the more it goes out to people. And I that's cool. What's even cooler now is that I found the content that's important, and it actually gets likes by itself.
Yeah.
I don't have to rely on sort of paid likes to a degree, if that makes sense. And when your content's right, people listen. When your content is caring enough that it hits people in the heart and it makes a difference, and you're prepared to care enough about your content that it's relevant, it makes a big difference. And if your content makes a difference, people will listen and people will get some value from it. And you'll get this, the 1,000 true followers, as Tim Ferriss in his book, The Tell the Titans, talks about. And all of a sudden your brand will grow and you'll actually make a difference on the planet. And I think the biggest lesson for me over the years has been around content and brand is to think about your audience, think about who you're talking to every time with a focus on, because your audience is investing in you, they're investing their time. And if they don't get a return on that investment, Christian, you haven't, as a content producer, you haven't actually done your job properly. And so there's got to be this understanding that people are investing in you, and if they're investing in you, they need a return on their investment. And so you've got to be able to produce quality content consistently. And you know what? You've got to challenge the norms. You've got to be out there. Like, I say stuff that I usually, after each podcast or webinar, I'll get an email that someone says, I disagree with you, champ. And that's great, because you won't get the disagreeers unless you've stood for something. And you've got to stand for something. You've got to have a view in your content. Like, you listen to Gary Vee, he's really strong on his views and he swears a bit, and I'm cool with that, but he has strong views, strong beliefs, strong. Simon Sinek is the same. He thinks differently. He talks about values differently to any other business on the organization. He talks about values as a verb, not as a noun. Most of us think of values as nouns. He talks about them as a verb, right? They're doing words. Instead of honesty, integrity being values, the verb is, I will personally do what I say I'm going to do. There's a different way. Integrity, or I will personally. There's ownership, right? So you got to stand for something. You got to have views in your content, and if it goes against current thinking, like, the biggest thing that I think that I've said that has annoyed people probably, and I've got the most negative feedback about, is I said, if you're in an organization, please don't, in a large organization, please don't stand there with a clipboard and audit someone doing a toolbox talk. That's crapola. One, because you probably don't do toolbox talks yourself. And two, because it puts them off. And three, because it's not the right way to measure the outcome of a toolbox talk by auditing someone. Go and ask the people in the toolbox talk how they felt, what their experience was. Then you'll find out whether the toolbox talk was successful. So, you sort of got to challenge the norms a little bit in your content. Is that cool?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, my kind of area of expertise is all around slips and falls, which is one of these classic things where people just accept it, or they just think it's inevitable, and so they don't put the effort in. So it's about trying to shift that perspective and say, well, these things aren't inevitable. You can stop them. They cost more than you think. They hurt more people than you thought they did. And you're just trying to constantly sort of poke the bear almost without poking them too hard.
Poke him hard, Christian. Poke the bear hard.
Yeah, no, I do, to be fair, poke pretty hard, but
good work.
I
love the work you're doing, and keep up the good work too, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, no, same. I think the more of us that are out there producing content around these topics, because there aren't that many, to be honest, and that's a shame, because it is really important. So the more of us there are, the better. And I think we've got to keep encouraging and pushing people on to innovate and keep doing good stuff. That's important.
Love it. Innovate and facilitate.
Yeah.
I don't think you get innovation without facilitation. Life is a team sport, right? Leadership's a verb, and it's a doing word, and it's about how we get how we get a collective mindset around
Yeah.
the best opportunity.
Exactly, and it's kind of one of the reasons one of the reasons I do the podcast is because I've always loved podcasts, and the other is actually because to try and give a platform to people to get their message out there more widely. I don't do the podcast and talk about me. I give that platform to other people.
Good on you. Great work, mate. And that's a real giving. That's a real, others focused opportunity for people like us, and we're grateful for it too. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll share it as well on my website, and I'll share it everywhere that I can, LinkedIn as well. So
yeah, no,
hopefully we can help you back.
Absolutely, yeah. I think for me, it's someone said to me once, Australian guy actually. Have you ever come across a guy called Daniel Priestley who does Key Person of Influence? He's got a book called Key Person of Influence.
Did he write the book,
Yeah.
Key Person of Influence? Yeah. Oh, yes.
Good
I
book.
have it.
You'd
I have
like
the
it.
book.
Yeah. Anyway, he said, so I work with him. I'm a client of his, and he says, don't be the spotlight, become the spotlight. So in other words, don't be famous for being famous's sake. Be famous for the issues that you highlight and the help that you give, and that's a really good mindset around production of content and getting things out there, I think.
I love that. Don't be in the spotlight, be the spotlight. Ooh. That is going to stick with me.
You can nick that one, don't worry. It's not mine, so
that's all right. 10%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll tell him.
Every time I use it. Yeah, good work, mate. No, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, I stole another of his little sayings the other day for an article I wrote actually as well. But there we go. He doesn't mind. He's all for content as well, so it's all good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and right. It's actually a great book too.
Yeah, it is a good book. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I recommend it to everybody because I think, even if you're you're not a business owner, I think even if you're just anybody within a business, actually some of the principles there around, you get what you pitch for and all that stuff,
Absolutely, take your stand.
Yeah.
No, love it.
Great. So thanks very much for your time today. Conscious we're coming up to our limits, but just wondered, I haven't really asked you what you do. So do you want to give a quick pitch for what exactly the business does, and then where people can,
right.
I'm sure this will have resonated with people. So where they can find more info, plug the book, website, etc.
So we do leadership and safety leadership, Christian. So we help leaders become better versions of themselves and create high-performing teams. And then in the safety leadership space, we do psychological and physical safety. So we really unpack what it means to be emotionally fit as well as physically safe at work. So that's probably in a nutshell. That's the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
and you can find theguineagroup.com.au. So and on there's plenty of resources. There's books there, and I'll tell you what, as a special gift to maybe your listeners, I'm happy to do a free copy of my safety book that I've written, if that would help your listeners. So I've written a book, Let's Talk About Safety. Let's get it out there. Let's have a conversation about it. And there's 19 key principles in that book that we can really have a conversation around, and it's around these limiting beliefs and how you, as a leader, can listen out for those limiting beliefs and have a conversation around those. So for any of your listeners, and maybe, if people email me or you with because they've listened to this podcast, I'm happy to give them a free e-copy of that book. So hopefully that gives back a little bit to you and your listeners. And I'll send you a copy of that too.
Fantastic.